A note on metal. The early Bronze Age would, I suppose, locate the beginnings of Western alchemy, the theory of quality as essential. The emergence of metal technologies, smelting and beating, followed by knowledge of alloys, was clearly a new way with the magical forms through which property resided in substance. Until this stage, weight was the most specific carrier for the inherence of power, and weight was and is a mixed condition, related locally to exertion. The focus of this condition is typically stone, and though this seems most obviously to insist on the compact outer surface, in fact it provides the most important practical and cultic inside, the cave. The privilege of that ambiguity about surface gives the painted rock shelter and the megalithic chamber tomb the power of formal change, and in this way substance can be extended, by incorporation, to allow the magical and political, social presences their due place. Whereas with copper, tin, and perhaps antimony, weight coincides with other possible conditions, which are less mixed and specific: brightness, hardness, ductility, and general ease of working. And further, the abstraction of property, characterized as formal rather than substantive, makes the production of alloys a question of technique in the most theoretical sense. Bronze may have been known to the Sumerians at a very early stage, and yet tin is rare in the Near East and must have been imported over considerable distances. The difference between the kinds of intent supporting the movement of bluestones from Pembrokeshire to Wessex and the Sumerian acquisition of tin from Cornwall or Bohemia must be obvious. And through the agency of the most ostensive control of force, namely fire, sword blades or spearheads could be forged into a strength infinitely more abstract than the flaking of high-quality flint or the hardening of wooden points. The new quality thus gained was sharp and killed with new speed and power from a long range. Animal hides could be sewn up with metal bodkins and fish taken with fine wire hooks. The metal plowshare could cut deeper into the soil and with less effort. The new quality of spiritual transfer was concentrated in these most durable forms of leading edge, seen especially in the flattened motive of ornament, and the history of substance, stone, shifts with complex social implication into the theory of power, metal. That's a deliberately simplified sketch, because it may well be that this theorizing of quality, with its control over weaponry and tillage, and hence over life, induced a deeper cultural adherence to substance as the zone of being in which the condition was also limit, the interior knowledge of dying. By death, I mean here in particular those forms of life and ritual, the extension of body, in which persistence through material transmutation was an ego term, even when socialized, rather than one concerned chiefly with the outer world, enemies or animals hunted for food, flesh as object. So that stone becomes the power substance marking the incorporated extensions of dying, and is still so as a headstone is the vulgar or common correlative of a hope for the afterlife. And in parallel with this reactive development, maybe an exilic theory of substance, comes the rapid advance of metallurgy, shifting from the transfer of life as power, hunting, into the more settled expectation of reaping what you have already sown. This itself produces the idea of place as the chief local fact, which makes mining and the whole extractive industry possible from then on. The threshing of millet or barley must bring a purer and more abstract theory of value. The mixed relativism of substance leads, by varied but in outline predictable stages, to value as a specialized function and hence as dependent on the rate of exchange. The Sumerian settlement was founded on the innovations of metallurgy, and these abstractions of substance were in turn the basis for a politics of wealth. The concentration of theoretic power by iconic displacement of substance. The unit of exchange was still the ingot by weight, and not yet coins by number. But we are already in what Child called a money economy, as opposed to a natural economy. There is already a code of practice for capital loaned out on interest. For a long time, the magical implications of transfer in any shape must have given a muted, and perhaps not initially debased, sacrality to objects of currency status, just as fishhooks and bullets became strongly magical objects in the societies formed around their use. But gradually, the item form becomes iconized, in transitions like that from eis rude, irregular bits of bronze, through eis signatum, cast ingots or bars, to eis grave, the circular stamped coin. The metonymic unit is established, and number replaces strength or power as the chief assertion of presence. In consequence, trade routes undergo a dramatic expansion, since mercantile theory operates with the most conspicuous success when employed over large intercultural distances. In the early Bronze Age, Peninsular Italy, Central Europe, the West Baltic coastlands, and the British Isles were united by a single system for the distribution of metalware, rooted in the Aegean market. The clearest instance of this type of change arises probably where a more sophisticated and progressive economy meets an idiom of change and value less efficiently abstracted. The mercantile contact between the seaborne traders of the Eastern Mediterranean and the peoples of the Anatolian hinterland can show this interaction already by the late Bronze Age, for this region circa 1600 BC. On the great alluvial plains of Asia, the condition was one of power rather than value, that is, substance, and not, in the first instance, transfer as exchange. Flocks and herds can be stolen, bartered, given in gift or tribute, so that wealth for the most part is the power of a technique to hold all that. Again, the politics of limit. Whereas the Greek traders were already middlemen with no political standing, Sardis no city but a commercial center working on the trick of abstract distance between real supply and real demand. Lydia, as Child again said, was a frontier kingdom owing its prosperity to transit trade. Here, finally, and for the first time, according to tradition, arises sheer mercantile distance in the form of coin, where the magical resonance of transfer is virtually extinct. That coined money should have been evolved here, the Eastern Mediterranean, is not surprising, for it was an area of intense commercial activity, encouraged and fostered by natural advantages. The Lydians, the first shopkeepers, as Herodotus called them, as well as the neighboring Ionians, received goods from the caravan routes and river communications across Asia. They had access to safe and sheltered harbors for easy coastwise trade. They exported their famous Chian wines, their purple dye which gave its name to Erythrae, and their Samian pots. But above all, they were renowned for their gold, which provided the fabulous wealth of Croesus, and still more fabulous wealth of Midas. And Croesus, the first recorded millionaire, is also the first to devise a bimetallic currency, where even the theoretic properties of metal are further displaced into the stratified functionalism of a monetary system. We are almost completely removed from presence as weight, and at this point the emergence of a complete middle class based on the technique of this removal becomes a real possibility. So that by this stage there is the possible contrast of an exilic, left-wing history of substance. And yet the shifts are offset and multiple, and in the earliest stages are accompanied by extensions of awareness, newly sharpened by exactly that risk. The literal is not magic, for the most part, and it's how the power or displacement side-slipped into some entirely other interest which is difficult, not a simple decision that any one movement is towards ruin. Stone is already the abstraction of standing, of balance, and dying is still the end of a man's self-enrichment, the reason why he does it. The North American Indians developed no real metallurgy at all at any stage of their history. The whole shift and turn is not direct, as Child too insistently would have us believe, but rather the increasing speed of displacement which culminates only later in a critical overbalance of intent. If we are confident over the more developed consequences, at the unrecognized turn, we are still at a loss to say where or why.